Illiterate Manga Club.
Hey yo, welcome back to Illiterate Manga Club. It's your boy, Live Action Nick. So yeah, I just finished watching live action One Piece. It was kind of like a project because it's 8-hour-long episodes. Went on a Netflix binge session like normal people do, but this is a series that I hesitate to say that I was looking forward to. I guess it would be more accurate to say I was sort of cautiously optimistic about it, since live action adaptations of anime, especially on Netflix, tend to be pretty hit or miss. But this one seemed like it had a little bit more kind of going for it. This one seemed like it was being made out of a sort of genuine love of One Piece, and it had the blessing of the author Ichiro Oda. So that was like reassuring. It's always a bad sign when the actual like creator or original director of something says that they're not okay with the live action series. Like I remember the director of the original Cowboy Bebop, he did like, it was some kind of interview or he did a statement or something talking about the Netflix adaptation, how he didn't like it. I'll have to go and dig that up. But yeah, when the original creator of something is like, this sucks, you know you fucked up. But yeah, I went into it not really expecting the world out of it. I wasn't gonna be like mad if it ended up being not all that great. But I'd say it was pretty good overall. It was maybe a little bit better than I was expecting it to be. I'd say it was a good adaptation of the original sort of like saga of One Piece. And I would even go as far as to say that there's a couple of changes in the Netflix series that I think I might actually like a little bit better than the original. And I think definitely the hardest part that they probably faced was just trying to solve the dilemma of getting a manga that looks as sort of goofy and over the top as One Piece, and trying to kind of translate that into a live setting with actual people. Since, you know, if some guy had come up to me and was like, all right, Manga Nick, we're going to put you in charge of making live action One Piece, I would be like, can you find somebody else to do it? Because I think that's where the real sort of head scratcher comes in, is how do I make this look like, you know, not like shit? Because the One Piece manga is not very realistic looking at all. Like, there's humans that are like 20 feet tall, characters routinely make faces like this. You know, it was a little funny looking sometimes. So I'd imagine that was kind of like the dilemma of this series was, okay, are we going goofy mode or are we going serious mode? And I think they overall managed to kind of strike a balance that works most of the time. I think especially with some of the more kind of silly looking characters, it didn't quite translate right. Like Captain Nizumi, for example, just looks sort of like kind of distractingly weird. Or you have cases like Kuro's two lackeys whose names I don't remember. Those two especially look really funny, and you know, like I said, that's kind of just the dilemma, especially when it comes to East Blue, is that the East Blue saga is generally pretty goofy. Lots of funny looking characters. It's generally lighthearted, except for moments where like Sanji as a small child starves on a rock for 70 days, and the dude he's stuck with eats his own leg. But you know, other than that, it's a barrel of laughs, right? But other than those occasional sort of standouts, I feel like in general, the characters translated pretty well. Like all the Straw Hats, I think they look really good. Most of the Marines look good. The Fishmen especially, I was surprised by how good the Fishmen look. I'm not sure if they're being done with like makeup or CG or some kind of combination of both, but yeah, they did a really good job on the Fishmen. Mihawk especially looked fucking killer. They nailed Mihawk, dude. So the characters I think look generally pretty good. One thing, this bothered the hell out of me. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I hate the way the Going Merry look. Because in the original, the Merry has this sort of like cartoony sheep head, but in the adaptation, it has its mouth like open. It just looks demonic. It looks like a fucking altar to Baphomet or something. So every time I saw the Going Merry head, I didn't feel at peace. I think the way that the Going Merry is supposed to make you feel. You know, the Merry is supposed to be cute. It's also not like painted at all. It's kind of just this one sort of flat piece of like stone or wood or whatever. So that was probably like the one sort of aesthetic thing that bothered me to no end for whatever reason. Well, I guess it could be worse, right? Like I'm sitting here complaining about like a ship instead of something else, but I don't know why the Merry bothered me. And speaking of being bothered, so I would say other than just kind of like the general aesthetics of it, one thing that I was pretty worried about was how a lot of these characters were going to translate into sort of being performed by real people. Since, you know, One Piece, very goofy, very expressive. So obviously there's no way that a human was going to make a lot of those sort of like Oda faces. But I think the actors overall did a pretty good job in their roles. Like, I think especially a lot of the bad guys fucking killed it. Jeff Ward as Buggy especially, I think he was probably sort of like the standout actor of the thing for me. When I first saw the character in like the teaser at the end of the first episode, I was kind of worried he was going to end up being sort of like a knockoff Heath Ledger's Joker, right? But he did a really good job. I think he was very sort of, you know, in character when it came to Buggy while sort of putting his own kind of twist on it. They really nailed the feeling of Buggy being this sort of like, actually kind of lowly, like shitty sort of guy who just has these delusions of grandeur. And we actually get to see more Buggy than I was kind of expecting to, which is a cool thing. I'll talk about that in a little bit when I get to some of the changes, but some other kind of highlights that aren't the Straw Hats. Stephen John Ward as Mihawk. Like I said, that dude just felt like he was Mihawk. I think Mihawk probably has the best sort of like costume design and sort of aesthetic going on. Like, he looks and acts so much like the actual Mihawk, it's kind of uncanny. Aiden Scott does a really good job as Helmeppo. I really liked seeing him. I'm not sure how to pronounce this guy's name. Alexander Maniati? He's really good as Kuro. And Vincent Reagan does a good sort of more subdued take on Garp. Like, Garp in the original is a very kind of bombastic, over-the-top kind of guy. Whereas in the adaptation, he definitely feels a lot more kind of toned back. Like, he feels like a sort of more realistic, like, Navy man sort of character. But speaking of the monkey family, so without a doubt, this is the character that I was the most worried about. I felt like this, like, how they translated Monkey D. Luffy was going to kind of make or break the series. Since, you know, Luffy as a character is already kind of contentious. A lot of people don't really like Luffy very much, which I can definitely understand. He is a pretty over-the-top sort of fella. And so that was definitely my fear, was that a lot of the sort of goofiness of Luffy was just not going to translate into live action very well, and that he would kind of just come across as being, like, insufferably annoying. You know, for whatever reason, I find it's like, it's easier to get annoyed with a real person than a sort of a cartoon character, right? So that was definitely a big worry of mine, was like, okay, what is this gonna be like? Like, I think out of the Straw Hats for sure, Luffy is the one that's the hardest to get right. I didn't think Luffy was overall pretty good. I think they did a good job sort of sticking to the kind of philosophy of the character, while avoiding making him just like overbearing and like really annoying. Since they definitely kind of put his honesty at the forefront. And I think it helps that I feel like they did a pretty good job kind of capturing the idea that Luffy is like, he doesn't do dumb stuff out of like sort of maliciousness. He just like legitimately doesn't get it a lot of the time. Like when he's eating at the Baratier, and since he doesn't have any money, he's just like, oh yeah, put the meal on my tab. And Zeph is like, bro, what tab? What? So yeah, I think that like your enjoyment of Luffy is probably not going to radically differ from how much you like him in the manga or the anime. If you don't like Luffy there, you're probably not going to like him too much here. You know, he feels pretty intact. He talks about wanting to be king of the pirates a lot. He's not really too worried about what other people say is impossible. Very innocent, he's got a heart of gold and really values the people that are close to him. You know, he's Luffy, bro. Oh yeah, so before this kind of slips my mind, one thing that I was pretty worried about just from seeing the trailers is how, like, quippy the adaptation was gonna be. Or, like, how much it was going to try to sort of force humor into situations, since that's always something that kind of gets on my nerves. Is like, I don't really know another way of putting this, but whenever things kind of have like Avengers syndrome, where things aren't just like allowed to happen, there always has to be like a joke attached, or there has to be a sort of a funny comeback from another character, or just like a Starky observation or whatever. And there's definitely a little bit of that, but it's not as like bad as the trailers kind of made it out to be. And a lot of the time when it does happen, it feels sort of like seed appropriate. You know, it's not like, oh, when Zoro loses to Mihawk when he fucking slashes him across the chest. It's not like Usopp goes, well, that's gonna leave a mark, or something stupid like that, right? I think in the last episode especially, I definitely kind of started to feel like they were starting to like insert a little bit too many sort of like quippy things in there, but there weren't too many that made me like physically cringe, so that's good. But yeah, other than Inaki as Luffy, I feel like everybody was pretty well cast. They all feel pretty true to the characters. I especially liked Jacob Romero Gibson as Usopp. I think they all kind of fit into their roles pretty well. They look like the characters that they're supposed to be. Overall, yeah, I really don't have any like major problems when it comes to the cast or The acting, there's maybe like the occasional scene where I was like, they probably could have done another take on that one, but overall it was good. Okay, so definitely the biggest surprise of this entire thing was how much stuff was actually changed around. You know, I was expecting this to be a pretty clean cut, sort of like almost one-to-one recreation of the East Blue just in a live action setting, but no, there's actually quite a few changes to just like, especially how much certain characters show up, which I ended up enjoying a lot. Like, I think there's definitely kind of a debate that you can have when it comes to adaptations of stuff, where it's like, how much should be changed, if anything? Like, is it better to just stick to essentially a one-to-one recreation of the thing just in a different format? Or if you're going to adapt it, you might as well kind of like try to make it different. But then that kind of opens a whole new can of worms where you're like, okay, is the director gonna get like a stick up their ass and think, you know what, I can do it better? But no, most of these changes I actually really liked, and it kind of kept me wanting to watch more of the series because then I sort of had something to look forward to, right? Once I realized that certain things were being changed, suddenly it was like, okay, we're not safe anymore. It's like there are going to be sort of adjustments to the story and things that I'm not expecting. And one of the bigger things was how much more involved Koby, Helmeppo, and Garp are. Since in the original manga, what happens is, you know, Koby's obviously involved in the very beginning of the Romance Dawn arc. Then him and Luffy part ways, and then during the Diary of Koby Meppo, that's where we get to see them meeting Garp and doing all their training and stuff. And then they don't like actually show up again until fucking Water 7. Whereas in the Netflix show, they are a much more active part of the story. So we get to see, instead of like Koby and Helmeppo joining the Marines and kind of just fucking off, we actually get to see them like chasing after the Straw Hats and kind of getting involved in the stuff that's going on in the East Blue. Like, we get to see them going and trying to arrest Kuro, and we get to see them on the Baratier. At one point, the Straw Hats get into like a ship battle against Garp, and like Koby and Helmeppo are there. So yeah, those two and Garp are a much more involved, I mean, I guess in Garp's case, he's like actually there, but they are a much more involved part of the East Blue saga, and I actually really, really like that. Since it makes Koby feel a lot more like, not necessarily a rival, but it just makes him feel like he's a much more active part of the story, which is something that when I was going through One Piece, I was kind of surprised that he sort of wasn't. Like, in pretty recent times, he's become a little bit more involved in the story, but, you know, Koby will go through these multiple saga-long stretches where he just doesn't show up, or he just doesn't do anything at all. And I always kind of assumed when I started reading it that wasn't going to be the case, since he's introduced at, like, basically the total beginning of the series. Yeah, getting to see him and Helmeppo, like, wherever Koby goes, Helmeppo is there, and you get to see their relationship, like, really form and them kind of bond and start to respect each other. And it's cool. I especially really like this incarnation of Helmeppo, since he definitely feels more like his own guy instead of just, the dude that hangs out with Koby. And another really big change, like I said, is that Garp is here from the very beginning. Like, in the adaptation, we get to see that Garp was there, like, on the scaffolding when Roger was executed, and he basically serves as, like, the Marine threat through the entirety of East Blue. This is a change that I think is, like, cool, but I'm not as, like, kind of in love with it as I am with the Koby change. Garp definitely feels like he's kind of the character that's been sort of changed around the most to kind of suit his new role. Like I said, he's a lot more kind of serious and somber in this one. In the original, he's sort of a goofy dude. He still shares a lot of traits with the original, like his big appetite, the fact that he, like, throws cannonballs, and his impressive physical strength and stuff like that. But he's definitely been kind of molded to be more of a sort of traditional mentor figure for Koby and Helmeppo. And I think he's been more so kind of shifted towards being a sort of quote-unquote good representation for the Marines. So yeah, that was probably my favorite thing about it. If you're a Koby enjoyer, you should probably check this out, because there's a lot of Koby content to be found here. Another little change, this didn't really have much bearing on the story itself, but it's still a cool sort of Easter egg, is that Baroque Works is actually introduced really early. And this whole scene, this is something that I forgot was even, like, alluded to in the manga, but Zoro was actually asked to join Baroque Works by the previous Mr. 7, who got killed by Zoro. But we never actually got to see what he looks like, but in an SBS, Oda drew, like, a really shitty mock-up of the old Mr. 7, the one Zoro killed. And we actually get to see in the live-action series the scene of that Mr. 7, just like an actual fleshed-out version of Oda's shitty fucking drawing drawing, like coming and asking him to join Baroque Works. So that was a really cool little addition. Like, that actually goes to show that they actually do, like, know about One Piece and that they care about the story, is that they went through the trouble of, like, including a sort of off-screen thing that we never saw in the original, and take this fucking doodle that Oda did of the old Mr. 7 and actually turn him into a real guy. That's so cool. And another character that gets way more spotlight is Buggy. In the adaptation, like, rather than kind of just setting up shop in Orangetown, he's actually conducted this whole, like, torture circus where he's got all the residents like chained up and forced to watch his performances and his like circus act. So yeah, that whole kind of section of the story is very different. Buggy no longer gets kicked in the testicles, which, you know, kind of a bastardization of Oda's vision. But that's not like the end of Buggy's involvement. So then Arlong and the Fishmen roll up to where Buggy is at. And so yeah, we get to see like Buggy and Arlong interaction, which is kind of cool. And they basically start using Buggy as like a fucking tracking device. Like they remove his head from his body. And so Buggy's head just becomes like this reoccurring element of the story. It's really awesome, which I really enjoyed seeing. I'm a big Buggy enjoyer. And so even though some characters get a lot more involvement, some characters kind of just get like fucking shafted. Like for whatever reason, Don Krieg is just like written out of the equation basically. So what happens is Garp calls in Mihawk to go to the Baratier to try and like deal with Luffy and them. And so we get to see that like when Mihawk gets the call from Garp, he's actually in the process of fighting Don Krieg and his fleet. And in the original, what happens is Don Krieg like gets away and goes to the Baratier and Mihawk like chases after him. But in the adaptation, Mihawk just fucking thrashes Don Krieg, so he never makes it over to the Baratier. So this is a change that might ruffle some feathers. Like, I'm personally okay with it because I've never liked Don Krieg, like almost at all. He's definitely my least favorite out of the East Blue bad guys. I've just never really found him very interesting. I've never really liked the fights that he's involved in. So this is a change that I'm a-okay with, even if it is a little weird, honestly. I guess the people making the show didn't like Don Krieg either. Yeah, there's a couple more changes. Those are sort of like the major ones, but overall, I actually really liked seeing a lot of these changes. Like, I think the Kobe and Helmeppo being more prominent especially is just like kind of a good thing. I wish the original manga did that. Since I like Buggy a lot, I like seeing Buggy show up more. I think it overall did a good job making the bad guys feel a little bit kind of less like villain of the week sort of guys, like it kind of feels in the original manga. Because a lot of these characters are like active before and after they're defeated, so it kind of just makes the sort of East Blue feel a little bit more like a natural place. So I think that's probably my favorite thing that's like sort of a new idea, is how a lot of these characters just feel more like consistently integrated into the story, like Kobe, like Buggy. Not Don Krieg though, fuck Don Krieg. All my homies hate Don Krieg. So yeah, I don't think I had too many major complaints. The fucking going merry looks a little weird. Some of the fights I felt could have done with a little bit more kind of impact. They definitely, some of them feel a little sort of reserved. Like Sanji especially, I hope for season 2 that they kind of make his kicks feel like they have a little bit more impact. You know, for the time being, he's kind of just like kicking stuff. We're not really at the point where Sanji is like lighting himself on fire. So hopefully going forward, his attacks feel a little bit more kind of dynamic. But otherwise, most of the fights were fine. Like, they usually don't last all that long. The show is really not like all that action heavy, which is fine by me because I've always been a lot more into the characters and the setting and kind of the lore of One Piece as opposed to the actual fights. But there's some good ones for sure. Like Mihawk versus Zoro was awesome. That I think was probably sort of the standout fight of the whole thing. Most of the fights involving Zoro are pretty good now that I'm thinking about it. So yeah, live action One Piece, I enjoyed it a lot. It wasn't perfect for sure, but I think it was a pretty damn good effort. I think this is probably just about as close as you could get to being like a good live action adaptation of One Piece. And I'm looking forward to the next season, whatever that happens. Man, next season's gonna be interesting. There's a lot of stuff that I'm sitting here and I'm wondering, like, how is that gonna work? Like, how are they gonna have Chopper in the series, for example? Like, is he gonna be a CG model? Or, you know, all of Alabasta and Baroque Works. That's where I start to kind of scratch my head and be like, how is that gonna work? Like, how are they going to adapt that? So they've at least got me curious. I'm looking forward to the next season. But yeah, thank you all for joining me on today's Illiterate Manga Club. Don't forget to let me know what you thought about live action One Piece in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.